Marriages that thrive are where husbands and wives have a core bedrock of common convictions that they can come back to and say, this is what we're building on. This is our foundation. And no matter what else is happening, we keep coming back to these core convictions.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am so excited that you're back with me today. We're talking with Bob Lepine about marriage. And if you've listened to Monday's episode and yesterday's episode, I'm certain that you have been encouraged. I know that I have been, and we're living in this world, like we talked about at the end of yesterday's episode, where the enemy of our souls is trying everything he can to destroy our families, to destroy our marriages, to destroy our kids. And we need to not allow him to have a foothold. We need to work diligently to keep our marriages honoring to the Lord, to keep our families honoring to the Lord, so that we can lead our kids to the cross, so that we can lead them to Jesus, because he really is the only answer for all of this. You know, every one of us has difficulties in life, whether it's marriage, parenting, you talked, I think it was in episode 1 about, money issues and in-law issues. I mean, there's always something. And so the enemy is going to do what he can to destroy us, but we've got God on our side. And as I've talked about before, we get to choose whose team we're going to be on. And so choose Team Jesus, because
that's right.
Spoiler alert, Jesus wins in the end. So,
and this is so important, Yvette, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I remember hearing Dennis Rainey early on in our time together say that most people think that marriage is going to be lived on a romantic balcony. And we forget that it is lived, for the most part, in the middle of a spiritual battle.
Oh, yeah.
And in Ephesians 6, the Bible tells us we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Our enemy, there is an enemy who wants to destroy our marriage, and it's not your spouse. So we tend to think the problem in our marriage is our spouse, which is exactly what the enemy wants us to think, rather than us thinking the problem in our marriage is Satan.
Yep.
And if together we could look and say, okay, you know what? We've got conflict. We've got things going on, but you're not my enemy. I'm not your enemy. So let's together figure out how together we can defeat the enemy who wants to destroy us. He wants us to be thinking it's one another and to kind of forget that he's even in the picture. If we can come together and say, you know what? We're not going to let the enemy win here. We're going to together do spiritual battle against him. That's how marriages thrive.
Do you want help managing your homeschool day on a day-to-day basis? BJU Press has a new homeschool hub that can dramatically simplify things for you. You'll be able to see your child's workload, document grades, modify schedules, and more. The BJU Press Homeschool Hub is the resource you need for painless planning and happy homeschooling. Visit bjupresshomeschool.com to see how the hub can change your homeschooling. I'm sure you have probably read the book, Love and Respect by Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. I know that's been out for, I want to say probably 17, 18 years.
Yeah, a long time, right?
Yeah, but that book was really had a huge effect in our marriage and was very beneficial to us. And I remember him talking in the book. We actually, you know what? We watched the video series. They had a whole video course. And so we went through the video course. I don't know that I actually ever read the book, but I remember him saying, you have to understand exactly what you're saying, that your spouse most likely is not evil-willed toward you.
Right.
They're not trying to destroy you, just like you're not evil-willed toward your spouse. You're not trying to destroy your spouse. And it comes across that way oftentimes. You're trying to offend me, aren't you? Because if you're not, clearly you wouldn't be saying or doing the things that you're doing. And that's not it at all. It's like you said, I mean, it's the enemy who's attacking our families. And so
I read a book years ago, interviewed the author of a book called Bold Love. The author was Dan Allender, and Dan said, we have to differentiate in a marriage where there's conflict. We have to differentiate. Are we married to what he called a garden variety sinner, just a normal sinner like everybody else? Mm-hmm. Are we married to somebody who's a fool? Because the Bible has that as a category, the fool who says there is no God and pays no attention. Or are we married to an evil person? Mm-hmm. And he said, we love each of those three people differently, but our love needs to be, we first need to do the diagnosis. Is your spouse an evil person? Are they a fool? Or are they just an average sinner just like you are, and the conflicts you have come because sinners sin.
Right. Yeah, that's tough. So, at the end of yesterday's episode, I said I want to talk about how we as Christian couples can really thrive in our marriages, not just for ourselves, but for our kids as well. They watch everything that we do. And I realize that, with my girls, they're going to go into their marriage and they're going to act very much like I act as a wife, because I am the model for them as a wife. And that's a scary and high calling for me as a mom, more so than having sons, of course, who would be looking at my husband, but with having daughters, it's an important thing to me. I want my girls to go into their marriage, and have a successful marriage, as successful as possible. And I want them to thrive. And my husband and I were talking the other day, and I said, I want us to thrive, and we are. Again, all these years later, I wouldn't have said that the first 10, maybe 15 years of our marriage, and we've had our ups and downs, but now, as we've grown in the Lord, especially, and I'm assuming that's going to be one of your answers, we've learned really to thrive in our marriage, in a lot of ways. And there's, of course, we always still have things that we are working through. But how can you encourage us to not just survive our marriages, but truly thrive in them?
So I'll give you 4 markers that I think are the common markers of marriages that are thriving. And I'm going to take as a given what you just said, that both of us are committed to the Lord, that we're growing in the Lord, that this is what's important to us, and that we really are pursuing Christ wholeheartely. That's a given. With that in place, I think there are 4 things that marriages that are thriving have in common. And I'll give you the list of 4, and then we can unpack them as we have time to do it. The first is, there is extravagant love expressed between the husband and the spouse, the wife in a marriage. So the love is we're not thrifty with it. We're not chintzy with it. We are extravagant in how we express our love. I don't mean we spend a lot of money on it. I mean, we express it extravagantly. Second thing is, we are generous with our forgiveness. We are quick to forgive, and we are quick to overlook. Love covers a multitude of sins. It's a man's glory to overlook an offense. Some things we just let go and overlook. And then when we do have to confront, we're quick forgivers in a marriage. Third thing is, marriages are filled with enthusiastic encouragement. We are cheerleaders for one another, and we express that on and on. We are cheering one another on, and the world's doing enough to push us down. We should be able to look to one another as the one who's going to pull us back up and say, you can do this. You're doing great.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, there are going to be common convictions that we have. Marriages that thrive are where husbands and wives have a core bedrock of common convictions that they can come back to and say, this is what we're building on. This is our foundation. And no matter what else is happening, we keep coming back to these core convictions. I think those are the 4 things. If those are present in a marriage, it's pretty hard to see that marriage not thriving.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to unpack those, but let's take a quick break before we do that. We'll be right back. We want to thank all of our sponsors for making this show possible: BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, Apologia, and IEW. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back with Bob. Okay, so you gave us 4 kind of pillars to a marriage that is thriving. And the first one you said is extravagant love. Let's unpack these one at a time.
Yeah, let me just say at the outset here, this is in a book that I've just written called Build a Stronger Marriage, that is designed for, there are 17 short chapters in this book. And my idea is that a husband and wife can get the book and go out on a date night and read 3 or 4 pages. And there's some questions at the end, and you can start to self-diagnose and do some healthy work in your marriage. And so I talk about these 4 characteristics, and the characteristic of extravagant love is really where we are committed to putting the other person's good ahead of our own our own needs, our own goals. I'm committed to you doing well. And when we talk about extravagant love, we're not talking about an emotion. We're talking about a demonstration. Jesus said, greater love has no one than this. He lays down his life for his friend. We are regularly laying down our lives, our preferences for each other, and we are demonstrating our commitment to one another with faithfulness. And we were really helped in this by Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, because I found early on that I was trying to express love to Marianne in a foreign language. I was trying to express it through how I like to receive love. I was using words of affirmation and physical touch, and she was going, where are the acts of service that I'm looking for, right? Where's the quality time that I want? Yeah. And so understanding each other's love language can be helpful as we seek to express extravagant love toward one another.
Yeah. I love that book. That's probably the first book I would ever recommend to any married couple. I read that when we were first married, and it has been instrumental in our marriage as well.
Well, I'll say too, I wrote a book called Love Like You Mean It, where I took 1 Corinthians 13 and went verse by verse or character quality by character quality and said, in a marriage, what does it look like for love to be kind, for love to be patient, for love not to be self-seeking and not to keep a record of wrongs, all of the things it talks about there. So if we want to know what extravagant love looks like, 1 Corinthians 13 gives us a great picture, and I unpack that in the book Love Like You Mean It.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember years ago someone telling me to take 1 Corinthians 13 and put your name in front of love. Yvette is patient, Yvette is kind, Yvette is,
Yeah, we don't get very far before we go, whoops.
Right, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's true. I mean, once we look at ourselves and realize, okay, maybe I'm not loving like I should. But you take 1 Corinthians 13 and you take the 5 love languages, you figure out what your spouse's love language is, and it can literally change your whole world.
Exactly.
It can really change a marriage. So, okay. So the first one is extravagant love. The next one you said is generous with forgiveness.
Generous forgiveness. Yeah. And this is where, James says, let's be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And Ephesians 4 says, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. Christians are called to be great forgivers. Billy Graham's wife, Ruth Graham, said, a good marriage is the union of 2 great forgivers. We're going to offend one another. We're going to sin against one another in a marriage relationship. Yeah. And when that happens, we have to decide, when we've been sinned against, do I just let that go? Sometimes you do. Sometimes you just overlook a transgression. You pour grace on top of it and just let it go. Other times it's profound enough that you go, no, I'm going to have to confront that. And you go to your spouse and say, I believe you've wronged me. And there's a pattern for this, by the way, in Galatians chapter 6, where it says, if you see a brother who is caught in a sin, so if your spouse is in a pattern, an habitual pattern of sinning, and you're on the other side of that and you're being affected by that, you who are spiritual, which means you're going in with the right spiritual mindset, you're going in having prayed about this, having studied the Bible about this. You're going in with a humble heart. You who are spiritual go to restore the other person. So you're going not to attack, not to blame, not to get your pound of flesh. You're going to try to see your spouse who is struggling with a sin get free from that. Yeah. You go and restore that person with a spirit of meekness. So that means when we're having this conversation, I have to have a spirit of meekness in the conversation. And then you have to be on guard that you too don't get tempted and get sideways on things. So we have to be good forgivers, and we have to know how to, this is another thing I pack in Build a Stronger Marriage. What does it look like to exhibit generous forgiveness toward one another? When's the right time to bring it up? When's the wrong time to bring it up? And how do you go about it when you need to bring it up?
Yeah. Timing is important. That's for sure.
It is. Yeah.
On both sides, don't approach a difficult topic when they're tired.
Exactly.
Or when I'm tired, I should say. So, okay, that's great. So the next one is an enthusiastic encouragement.
Yeah. I just remember when I was in high school, I ran cross country one year in high school. I was not very good at cross country. I was middle of the pack as a runner. I would start off and I'd get about halfway around the track and I would just be dogging it and I'd be slow. And yet when we'd come back near the starting line and the cheerleaders were there and they were going, "Come on, Bob, you can do it." I started to get a second wind and I picked up my pace and I ran a little harder and a little stronger just because somebody was cheering me on.
Yeah.
You think about professional football players. I don't know how much you watch professional football, but
Never, ever. Not
so
at all.
on a Sunday, these guys are out on the football field. They're being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to play this game. And there'll be a big play coming up and they will be lifting their arms up and telling the crowd, "Make noise, cheer for us, we'll play better." And I'm thinking, we're paying you $1 million. Go give us your best. But they just know when in your ear, you're hearing somebody cheer you on.
Yeah.
There's something, you kick it into overdrive a little bit. And when we're doing that for one another, when we're saying to each other, "I believe in you, you can do it. You're really good at this. Man, you did an amazing job there." There's something about that affirmation that is so life-giving to the other person. The Bible says life and death are in the power of the tongue. Yeah. We have to ask ourselves, are we using our tongue to give life to somebody else? Or are we tearing somebody else down? Are we tearing our spouse down with our tongue? Yeah. So I think enthusiastic encouragement is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, this is just from my observation. I think that women have a harder time doing that. And I feel like there's more scripture that talks about women tearing down their house than there is about men tearing down their houses. Because it's easy for us to do that.
Go back to what you talked about with Emerson Eggerichs in his book, Love and Respect. Mm-hmm. So a husband is longing for respect.
Right.
He's desperate for his wife to say, "I respect you." The cheerleading is a part of how you say to your husband, I value you, I honor you, I respect you. His heart longs for that. And so I think there's a lot in the Bible about a wife tearing down because she's more naturally predisposed not to withhold respect until you earn it and prove it to me, and then I'll show you respect. Yeah. That's a pretty high bar for a husband to have to try to clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost impossible. So, yeah. Okay. And the last one is have a common conviction.
Yeah, and this is where I would say we've got to be in agreement on what matters most to us. Marriages that don't thrive are often because what matters most to me is not what matters most to you, and so we're isolated. I'm pursuing one thing, you're pursuing something else. Mm-hmm. We're not on the same page with these things. And of course, as Christians, what we should be pursuing is the heart of God. We should be pursuing our understanding, getting to know the Lord, growing together in grace, our commitment to our local church, our commitment to being missional and reaching out to other people. Those are the common convictions. And in a marriage between two believers, when we're not seeing things eye to eye, we can say, okay, what do we think the Lord wants here? What does the Bible have to say about this? And it gives us a way to bring our marriage back to something other than just, I want this, well, I want that. And we're divided that way. So having common convictions, having something that we keep coming back to and saying, we're going to build our marriage on this. Marriages that thrive have that in common.
Yeah. What about marriages that don't have common convictions? Because of course that is often the case, and often you have mom who's a believer and dad who's not, or dad who's a believer and mom who's not. Right. And that, oh man, I mean, that taking that back to the parenting question, that can cause all kinds of conflict in a marriage because now you're on two completely different roads of life. So how do you work through those issues?
Boy, it's so hard when we're in a situation where we're unequally yoked, and it's why the Bible warns us against becoming unequally yoked. But when you're in a spiritually mismatched marriage, you're not coming to the same source in terms of where we decide right and wrong or our values or where we're going to go. This is where I would say in that situation, look for where you do have commonalities and agreement. Mm-hmm. There are going to be things that you can agree with. So a believer and an unbeliever in general are going to believe that lying is wrong. We don't want our kids to lie. So let's find those things that we can build our marriage on together. And at the same time, just be praying for God to change the heart of the spouse who's an unbeliever. And I've talked to people who have been at it for decades with an unbelieving spouse. But I've also seen God change the hearts of those spouses over time,
Yeah.
as a wife or a husband just lives out faithfully in front of
Yep.
that other spouse what it means to live for God.
Yeah. 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 Great stuff. Well, we have just a couple minutes left. And in these last few minutes, I would love for you to just bring some encouragement first to the husband and then to the wife. If you're talking to a husband who's in a difficult marriage, what would you say to him?
So I would say, rather than being focused on what you can't control, which is your spouse's behavior, be focused on what God's called you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to Ephesians chapter 5 and see where it says, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And look for ways that you can be a sacrificial servant leader in your marriage and make that your focus. How can you demonstrate sacrificial servant love for your spouse so that your wife, she is just confounded by the generous love that you're showing, the extravagant love that you're showing for her, and just ask God to give you the strength to do that. Do it as unto the Lord. Recognize that every time you're expressing love for your spouse, Jesus is pleased with that. He's honored by that, and find your joy in that.
Yeah. And I like that you say, do it unto the Lord, because if you're doing it just to get your wife's reaction, she may not react for the first, I don't know, many times. I'm actually thinking about
5
the movie.
years.
Yeah. I'm sure you've probably seen the movie Fireproof.
Yeah.
The Kendrick brothers put that out many years ago. And that whole movie is about that exactly, where he realizes that he's basically been a terrible husband and his wife hasn't been much better, but he just starts serving her. And she's like, what in the world are you doing? And she really, she pushes him off and pushes him away for a long time. And then she finally realizes, oh, okay, there's something different about him because the Lord was working in his heart. So,
well, and if you're doing it for other reasons, you'll go, well, I tried that for 2 months and it didn't work. So I'm quitting on that. But if you say, no, I'm doing this forever because it's what Jesus wants me to do. Yeah. And I know he's pleased, whether my wife's pleased or not, whether she responds the right way or not, Jesus is going, way to go, Bob, do it again.
Yep.
So,
Yep. That's right. Okay. Bring some encouragement to the women, to the wives. What would you say to the wife who is, and I shouldn't say even who's in a difficult marriage, who's just in a marriage? Yeah. How do you encourage us as wives?
Well, again, I would say as a wife, make your focus on the only person you can change in the marriage, and that's you. And instead of being, I remember Elizabeth Elliot saying one time that if you're wearing a white shirt and you've got an ink pen in the pocket and it leaks and there's a little purple spot down at the bottom of the pocket where the ink has leaked, said anybody who looks at that white shirt, their eye is drawn immediately to that spot on that shirt, that purple spot. She said, now 99% of that shirt is white, but we obsess over the little purple spot there because it stands out. And she said a lot of wives today are obsessing over the little purple spot in their husband rather than seeing in him what is good and honorable and making that their focus and affirming that. Yeah. If your goal is I've got to fix my husband and get him perfect, you're always going to be frustrated. But if you're going to say I'm going to find what is good, Philippians 4:8, what is worthy and honorable, and I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to honor that, and I'm going to trust God to work out the other stuff. I think that's where your focus as a wife needs to be. Don't try to fix your husband, but try to respect your husband for the things that are in him that are worthy of respect.
Yeah. I remember years ago, I was doing a Titus 2 Bible study, and I remember the lady, Joanne Frank, who was teaching it. And she said, if the only good thing you can find about your husband is that he has nice knees, you tell him he has nice knees. And I thought that's so right. Because sometimes, we can be so angry with our husbands and so bitter towards them that we can't find anything good in them. And she said, if there's nothing else you can find but his knees, you affirm his knees.
She's right. Yep. Right.
Yep. Find something. So, well, tell us again, very quickly about your book. I know you've got a couple books. I actually didn't realize you had one called Love Like You Mean It.
Love
Okay.
Like You Mean It came out in 2020.
Okay.
And then this year, the book, or actually about 4 or 5 months ago now, the book Build a Stronger Marriage came out. Love Like You Mean It is 200 pages looking at 1 Corinthians 13 and what love looks like in a marriage relationship. Build a Stronger Marriage is 100 pages, and it's designed as kind of a mechanic's guide for how you can go through and spot the trouble spots in a marriage and start to do a little adjusting and see if you can't patch up some of the things that need patching up in your marriage.
Good stuff. Well, we'll put links to both of those books in the show notes, as well as some of the other books that we mentioned this week. Thank you, Bob, so much for being on with us again, and just for the wisdom and encouragement that you have brought to us. I am so grateful for you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Always a joy to be with you and bless what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for listening this week. We love you. If there's a way we can be praying for you, please send us an email at podcast@schoolhouserocked.com. We'll see you back here next week. Bye.
Education is discipleship, and this is something I didn't understand until I was probably 3 years into homeschooling. The Bible teaches us in Luke 6:40 that when a student is fully trained, he will be like his teacher. And as we look around the culture right now, I think it begs the question, who is teaching our children? Who is teaching our children, and what are they teaching our children? And to me, the primary benefit of having my children home with me is I am able to impart my worldview to my children